Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going through one of the A-levels exams. So this is the psychology exam paper from February-March 2021 this year. 1.5 hour exam. Some of my students I believe sat for this paper. Many of you would have sat for this, or well, those of you who sat for this already, you don't have to look at this video. But if you haven't sat for this paper and you're going to, then this video is going to help a lot. So I'm going to go through the entire paper and explain to you how I would approach an exam paper like this and how I think about questions and stuff like that. But there are generally 3 skills that I believe students need to have, right? The 3 skills that they need to have is: 1, you have to have memorized large chunks of your AS syllabus. That's not, you can't run away from that. You need to memorize a lot of facts. Secondly, you also need to have a certain amount of common sense, right? Especially if you forget certain facts, try and use common sense to fill in the gaps and sound academic, right? So that you might still get marks. And then thirdly, you need to have some level of critical analysis, right? These are generally 3 good skills to have when it comes to tackling exam questions, any kinds of questions, because if you have these 3 skills, you can pretty much ace your exam, right? As long as you've memorized the information required for your syllabus, you have a lot of common sense, so you know how to, put things in order, make sure your sentences and links flow and make sense, and lastly, that you have some critical analysis when it comes especially to evaluating certain things, right? Total number of marks for this paper is 60, so you always should do your best. Let's give it a try, okay? So, question number 1. From the study by Demon and Kleitman, Sleep and Dreams, name the stage of sleep when participants recalled most of their dreams. So I often tell my students that to prevent them from making careless mistakes, it's actually good to underline certain words or circle keywords so that you know that you're always going to be focused on the question and you don't think about things which are not relevant, right? So first of all, name the stage of sleep. So I would underline this in my own paper and okay, I need to think about the stages of sleep when the participants recalled most of their dreams, right? So when did they recall most of their dreams? So this tests your memory primarily, right? It tests your memory. Do you remember which stage of sleep that was? Okay, what do you think? You remember? Now, there are 2 stages of sleep, that was tested in Demon and Kleitman's study, right? They were talking about sleep and dreams. And so it's basically either REM or NREM, but which one is it, right? So if you remember, we dream more often in which stage of sleep? When our eyes are moving, underneath our eyelids, right? So that was the REM, right? Rapid eye movements. So take that out. We know that it was during REM sleep. Now, some students ask me, do you have to write the full form of REM? I think it's not necessary in this case. You could just put REM sleep. I think even just writing REM would get you the mark, right? Especially if it's a 1-mark question, it's usually just a 1-word answer or a 1-phrase answer that gets you the full mark, right? Now, some students might write things like, because you may have a syllabus that uses the word paradoxical sleep, and usually that, in my opinion, that should be accepted. Or perhaps some students might write, stage, I think it's 4 or 5, one of those stages of sleep. I generally tell students to avoid extra sort of answers. When it comes to Demon and Kleitman study, Demon and Kleitman were studying REM and REM. Just use those keywords. I think that's an easy way to play it safe so that you know you're going to get the mark. Don't write any fancy other words or scientific terms for REM sleep, which the examiner may not recognize immediately, right? They're marking hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of papers. So you want to make it easy so the examiner sees the keyword and immediately ting, gives you a mark, right? You get full mark. So just stick to the keywords, especially the keywords that are used in the study itself, right? REM sleep would be the right answer. Now, second thing, outline 1 dream reported by a participant that had vertical eye movements. Okay, so oftentimes students, I think for this kind of a question, I always drill my students. I always tell them when it comes to examples of things in studies, right? So these were the dreams that were reported. The study by Demon and Kleitman, they list several examples, 3 or 4 examples of dreams. I always tell my students, please, if you see examples written, memorize at least 2 examples, right? Memorize at least 2 of the examples. In Bandura's study, for example, you've got the toys in the room. In Demon and Kleitman studies, you've got the different dreams that are being reported. So memorize at least 2. Now, what the other mistake that students make is the vertical versus horizontal. Horizontal is this way, vertical is this way. How do you remember that? Just think about the word horizontal, H-O-R and all that. H, can you see this? This line in the middle of the H. So you remember horizontal with this line is this way, right? And then if you know that's horizontal, then vertical is obviously going to be like this, right? Up and down, horizontal, left to right. Okay, so that's how you remember it. Now, horizontal eye movements, so from this side to this side to this side. So I shouldn't be doing the curve, just ignore that. It's from left to right, left to right, left to right. Which eye movements go from left to right? Excuse me, vertical. So I confused myself, vertical. Which eye movements go from up to down, right? Up to down in the dreams. So they had a few dreams that I remember. There was one dream, and this is where it gets a bit tricky. Let me try and remember. There was one at a cliff. There was one dream about basketball, and there was also another dream, something about a hoist, if I remember correctly, or climbing up a ladder. No, it was a ladder. The hoist was on the cliff. So these are the three examples of dreams that were given, but this is not a good enough answer. You'd probably get 1 mark for this. It's a 2-mark question. So you need to, again, outline one dream that was reported. Outline the dream. Don't just state a word from the dream, right? That might get you, maybe if you're lucky, just 1 mark. You need to describe the dream. Why? It's a 2-mark question. A 1-mark question is a short answer. A 2-mark question requires some explanation or some depth to the answer. So I can't really remember the cliff one. I think something about looking at a cliff or something. I do, however, remember the basketball one. So you could say something along the lines of one subject or participant, let's just use the word participant since they use that. One participant reported a dream involving basketball. Right, so then, oops, again, I'm just writing it in my own words. You can write it in your own words, however you want to write it, as long as the points are there. So what was it about the dream that was vertical, right? They were looking down at the ball to pick it up, and then looking up at the hoop to take a shot. Right, so yeah, if you have just written something along the lines of, oh, they just had a dream of playing basketball, that would only get you 1 mark. As I said, you need to have, let me color this differently so you can see the answers. Put it blue. Okay, yeah, put it in different colors so you can see the difference. So if you had just written one participant reported a dream involving a basketball, you get 1 mark. If you just write basketball, if you're lucky, you get 1 mark. You need to describe why was it vertical. Remember, why was it vertical? It's looking down to pick up the ball and then also looking up to shoot it in the hoop, right? Something along those lines, you'll be able to get the marks. If you remember the other one about the ladder, it's something about climbing up a ladder and then looking up and down. Again, it's always the looking up and down. You relate the dream to the vertical eye movement so that the examiner knows that you know what you're talking about. You get full marks. Okay, now next. Outline one conclusion from this study. Okay, so there were several conclusions from the study. If you remember some of the conclusions, let me copy and paste this here. Okay. So conclusions at the end of the whole study, remember Damon and Kleitman were looking at dreams, in which REM or NREM do people dream more or do people not dream at all? Are they able to also accurately judge the amount of time that they spend dreaming, right? So what else was that? Eye movements, right? Okay, so this is actually where you can take some common sense, right? Like I said, sometimes in an exam you need common sense. Let's say you forgot most of Damon and Kleitman's experiment, but remember in this question, outline one dream reported using eye movements. So you can actually use this using your common sense to give yourself a conclusion. And what would the conclusion be? The conclusion would be that participants' eye movements during REM sleep correspond to the content of their dreams. For example, a participant who dreamed about playing basketball had horizontal eye movements, while a participant playing or participants throwing a tomato to someone else. Oh no, a participant watching two people throw a tomato to each other had horizontal eye movements. Okay, sorry, this should be vertical. Even I get them mixed up. Okay, so looking at this answer, do you think this would be a good answer? Okay, I'll tell you what the problem is, and I'll tell you this is a common mistake that my own students make. It looks like a fantastic answer. Will I get 2 marks? Yes, I will. But notice the problem here. I gave this a long example, which would have wasted my time when I'm in the exam. Yes, there are 4 lines given for me to write on, but that's just for the sake of people, I guess, who have big handwriting, right? You actually don't really need to give a long example like this. I think just having 1 example would be enough. Since I remember the tomato one, I think I might just use that. A participant who dreamed about, maybe a participant who dreamed about watching 2 people throw tomato had horizontal eye movement. So I might just add 1 example just for the sake of playing it safe. But generally speaking, even if I just had the top part, I should get 2 marks as well. Why? Because I've basically outlined the conclusion, right? Participants' eye movements during REM sleep correspond to the content of their dreams, right? This would actually be enough, in my opinion, to get 2 marks. But sometimes students are not very sure if they're going to get 2 marks or not. I will tell them, if you're not sure, just add a little example, right? Again, what are we doing? We're using the common sense that we have in our brains to use this, write this question and give us the answer here. If, let's say, we forgot all the other conclusions, right? The other conclusions being whether you can judge the time spent in REM with accuracy, whether or not your, I think that's pretty much it. Or whether that dreams occur more in REM than NREM. Now, the other mistake that students often make here is when they make their answers too short. So, for example, you might say something along the lines of eye movements are eye movements reflect dreams, something like that. Okay, eye movements reflect dreams. This is a little bit too short of an answer. It would not be suitable for a 2-mark answer. You maybe just get 1 mark, right? When you need 2 marks, you need to give a little bit of depth to your answer. So you can see participants' eye movements during REM sleep correspond to the content of dreams. A lot of nice keywords here, and it shows the examiner that you understand what you're talking about. The example, as I said, is completely optional. If you want to add it in, students love to add more than the necessary. Again, it's optional. You don't have to do it. I think as long as you get the first conclusion fairly accurate, that should be fine. Okay, let's move on. Okay, in the study by Piliavin et al., Subway Samaritans, 1 observer watched passengers in the critical area. Okay, so this kind of an opening sometimes is relevant to the question, and sometimes I know this A-levels messes with students a little bit, and I'll tell you why that is, right? So here, Piliavin study, so I know it's talking about Subway Samaritans. 1 observer, remember in the study, how many observers were there? There were 2, right? There were 2 female observers sitting on different chairs. 1 of them watched the critical area. 1 of them actually watched the adjacent area, ADJ, adjacent area, right? So both of them were watching different areas, and each of them recorded somewhat similar but slightly different things, right? Slightly different things. And this is where my students often make mistakes. They accidentally report the wrong things being observed. That's 1. But before that, let's look at the question. Name 2 variables that this observer recorded about these passengers, right? Now, name 2 variables is a very straightforward question. It's just asking you, literally, another word that is often used is state. S-T-A-T, excuse me, let me write that again, state, S-T-A-T-E. So if you see questions like state, name, stuff like that, they're just asking for very short, straight to the point answers. You don't have to give a long essay. Even though they give you 4 lines, you don't have to give an essay. It's just literally saying what were the 2 variables that were being observed. Again, it's a 2-mark question, which means 1 variable gives you 1 mark. 1 variable gives you 1 mark. So what would the answer be? Do you remember what the variables were? So they looked at a lot of things, right? They looked at time, the latency that was taken, but often, and they looked at things like where they were positioned and stuff like that. But the most obvious answers that I always tell my students to do is very simple: sex, location, not gender, sex, location, and race, right? These are 3 things that you should never forget, were always observed. And not only that, they were observed by both observers. So there was 1 observer in the critical, watching the critical area, and 1 watching the adjacent area. But both of them always recorded the sex, location, and the race of each participant. Since the answer requires just 2, we can just write sex and location of every participant. Or even easier, sex and race. I think that's even easier to remember. right? Everybody's got a sex, everybody's got a race in this world, right? So sex and race of every participant, done. You get 2 marks. Why do you get 2 marks? Because it just says name the 2 variables. You don't have to explain them. You don't even have to give examples if you want to. You don't have to say sex, male and female, race, black and white. If you want to, you could, right? Some students, they like to add that a little bit, but I believe, in my opinion, this is more than enough, right? Other possible answers you could add, like location, the number of individuals and so on, but this would be the easiest to remember. Okay, get 2 marks, done. Okay, move on. Pilyavin et al. Investigated the idea of diffusion of responsibility. Okay, outline what is meant by diffusion of responsibility. Okay, so now in this question, they've given you some statement about Pilyavin's study, right? What Pilyavin is looking at is diffusion of responsibility. But in this question, it says, outline what is meant by diffusion of responsibility. There is no indication here that it has to be from Pilyavin's study, right? Diffusion of responsibility is a concept that exists outside of Pilyavin's study, right? It was coined by someone else. Pilyavin is looking at it, yes. And so, with this kind of a question, students often make the mistake of telling me what Pilyavin did. So sometimes students will write things like, oh, Pilyavin tested large groups and found that they help more. So that's wrong. This is wrong. Why? Because the question's not asking you about Pilyavin. It's asking you what is meant by the diffusion of responsibility. In other words, it's pretty much just asking you for a definition. Okay, I just can't forget it. I can't write it. It's asking you for a definition, right? This is a definition question. So it tests your memory, right? But if you forget what the exact words of the definition is, you don't have to worry. Just use your common sense, right? What your common sense, right? You know, generally speaking, diffusion of responsibility means what? People don't feel as responsible as they do in groups, right? Large groups, less responsible. Responsibility, right? And it's something to do with emergency situations, right? Because we're looking at emergency situations. That's what happens in Pilyavin's study, right? There's an emergency situation. So using your common sense, you can pretty much just construct the answer, right? Take a minute to think about it, right? This is how I would phrase it. In an emergency situation, comma, people are less likely to help if they are in a group because each individual feels less responsibility as compared to if they were alone. So that's in my words. Again, these are just my words. How I would define it is not the textbook definition for it. You can memorize the textbook definition for your keywords if you want to, right? So in an emergency situation, people are less likely to help if they're in a group because each individual feels less responsibility as compared to if they were alone, right? So that's one way of putting it. That's just my personal definition. I think would be acceptable as 2 marks. Another way that you could define it is that you could also say something like they believe others will help, right? So that's also one of the things that people believe, right? It's either they feel less responsible because they think other people are going to help, right? So you could add that in if you want, but I think my answer should be sufficient for 2 marks. And as you can see, for 2 mark answer, you do have to give some level of depth, right? Don't just put a 1 sentence answer, right? It will be too brief for A levels. Okay. Next, outline one finding that did not support the diffusion of responsibility in study. And they also bold, they put this in bold, not support. What's the common mistake students make? They do the opposite. They give me a result that does support, right? So you need to tell me what does not support. Now, if you remember the study, this again, you need to remember what the study involves, right? So it did not support, right? Did not support. So if we know that the diffusion of responsibility means that larger groups of people or people in a group are less responsible, so that means if we're finding a finding that does not support, we need to find the opposite, where larger groups actually help more, right? So that's what we're looking for. Which one of the findings support this statement? That in Pilyavin's study, larger groups help more. Okay, if you remember the study, remember there was a comparison between 2 groups, right? The natural versus hypothetical groups, right? And they were in groups of 3 or in groups of 7, right? So obviously you want, to give yourself an easier answer, choose the larger group so that you know that you can talk about it in the perspective that you need to, which is the larger group actually helps more. So you could say something along the lines of, there were 7-person groups which provided faster help to the victims compared to the 3-person groups, right? There were 7-person groups which provided faster help to the victims compared to the 3-person groups. You could also add these 7-person groups also responded faster than the hypothetical 7-person groups to help the victim. Alright, so you could add that in, I think, and this would give you definitely more than enough good marks for a 2-mark answer, right? Now, I think just one of the, excuse me, even if you had just written one of this, I think that should be sufficient in my opinion. But if you want to play it safe, just write the second one as well and you'll definitely get 2 marks. I feel the first one is more than enough to get 2 marks because there's enough detail there, right? If you had just written, for example, if you just wrote the 7-person groups responded faster, this would not be a good answer. This would be a 1-mark kind of an answer, right? You need to compare because there was a comparison. 7 groups were being compared to 3-person, 7 groups was also being compared to 7 persons, right? So you need to always be aware that that comparison needs to be there in order to get the second mark. So either one of these would be able to get 2 marks in full in my opinion, right? You could also have added things like, you know, actually no, I think that's the 2 best answers. You could add things like a lot of participants helped the victim, I think, even before the model came in, right? So there was a model. Before the model even was able to help, participants already had helped, right? And that could be another thing that you could add here for the division of responsibility, right? Piliavin did not find much evidence to support division of responsibility. In Piliavin's study, people actually seemed to be more willing to help, okay? So let's move on to the next one. Explain one or more real-world applications, okay? Or the study by Bandura, do not refer to more than 3 applications in your answer. Okay, firstly, when it comes to real-world application, you want to know 2 things. Who does it help? And 2, how does it help them, right? So these are the 2 things I usually tell my students to focus on when it comes to answering this sort of question. When you want a real-world application, it usually has to do with the usefulness of a study in the real world. In other words, how does it help people? There's no point doing a lot of research and if you're not going to help people in some way, right? There has to be something useful that you can do. Otherwise, what's the point of doing research, right? There has to be some use for it. And usually it says real world application, so something, you know, that's useful in the real world, not just in the world of theory, right? And also the answer says do not refer to more than 3 applications in your answer. Now, if you look at the marks, this is a 5-mark question, 5 marks. 5 marks is a lot, so you need to have at least, in my opinion, I would say 2 to 3 examples, right? 2 is good enough, actually, 2 is good enough, as long as you give some depth. You must give depth. You can't just put a one sentence answer because it's a 5-mark question. Usually, although it's not a hard and fast rule, if it says 5 marks, you basically need 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of points, right, that are distinct, that have depth and detail, and you can get the 5 marks. But again, don't take that as a hard and fast rule. It's just a general guide, right? Just a general guide. So, for example, I might say something along the lines of, okay, so we're talking about Bandura study, right? Aggression. So we're talking about the study with the Bobo doll, and then, you know, the hammer by the child hitting the Bobo doll. Boom, that's my drawing of the Bobo doll. So all about aggression and how people observing others, children observing adults, can end up, you know, showing aggression. So one of the things that I think is commonly used as a real life application is, right, with regards to modeling by parents, right? So when your parents are at home, children follow their parents, right? Children follow, okay, I should write in, I'll write in point form because I won't write in essay. Should I write an essay? Okay, fine, I'll write in an essay form. My students want to see that as well. So one real world application would be with regards to parents' behavior at home. Okay, so I'll just do an introduction sentence. You don't have to do an introduction sentence. I just like to because that's just the way I like doing things. Okay, In Bandura's study, the children observed an aggressive model and then imitated aggressive behavior. Similarly, at home, if parents display aggression, children would be likely to copy. Therefore, parents should be careful to behave appropriately in front of their children. Or you could even add something like, they have to set a good role model. I'm writing in a very wordy way. You could make this, you could put it in your own words accordingly. To be role models, to set a good example, and so on and so forth. So that's one way that you can say is a real world application, right? Because children are going to observe and copy what their parents do. Now that's just one. You need to give at least two. I think 2 would be good. 5 marks for just one answer is a bit hard. I think it's a bit difficult. Another thing that you might do is that another real world application would be for, maybe we could say, for TV programs that children watch, right? In Bandura's study, children imitated aggression by watching adults. Therefore, parents should monitor what their children watch on TV and ensure they only consume children-friendly channels, right? Something along those lines, or cartoons or something suitable for children, right? You don't want children. Even my parents, when I was growing up, never allowed me to see adult programs because children should watch children programs. And so you get these two real-world applications. And notice what's important. I always identify who does it help. So this involves parents and children, right? How does it help them? By making sure you behave in front of your children, so that you can add actually, so that children imitate good behaviors. Or here you can add consume children-friendly channels, so their children imitate good values, something like that. Okay. This would be the who does it help, children and their parents. How does it help them? It's very clear. And also one thing I forgot to add, you should also, wherever possible, link it to the study. So as you can see in my answer, it's very comprehensive, right? I explain what the application is to do with parents' behavior at home or here in TV programs. I give evidence from Bandura study showing that Bandura study is linked to my application, right? And thirdly, I also go and say that, what should parents do, right, to improve their children's outlook and stuff like this. And then, how does it help the children? Children can imitate good behaviors or good values. So I think this would be definitely get 5 marks, right? If I do say so myself. In fact, more than 5 marks. If I could give myself 10, I'd give myself 10. But this is the way I would answer it. If, let's say, for example, your answer is short, right? You only wrote maybe 2 of these sentences and you can't remember, or you don't know what else to write, then give 3 examples, right? So if you can't explain an answer in depth, then give more examples. If you can explain it in depth, stick to 2, right? So that's one way that you could come up to write your answer, okay? Who does it help? How does it help them? Link it to the study. Okay, let's move on. From the study by Kenley et al. On brain scan and emotions. Okay, I don't particularly favor this study. So let's see if I remember the stuff involved. Name 2 characteristics. Okay, by the way, for those of you, just a quick refresher, you can watch all my previous videos on this. Brain scans and emotions were basically showing a bunch of women some pictures, and some of them were emotionally arousing and neutral and so on and so forth. And they would just observe the amygdala, right? How the amygdala responds and how it triggers their memory and stuff. So name 2 characteristics that were used to match the foil scenes and the previously viewed scenes. Okay, so they did two in the experiment. They had 2 rounds. One, they would show a bunch of pictures, and they would show the pictures again, but with some foils. Foils were pictures that were not included in the first round, and then they would ask them the second time, which of these pictures do you remember from the first round? But they would put foils there to mess them up, right? So how did they match the foil scenes and the previously viewed scenes? right? So there's the original scenes, and then there's the second round, and then some of them are foils, right? So but how do you make sure the foils are similar to the first round? So this is the first round. I'll just put first. This is the first round, and then these are the foils. How do you make sure the foils and the first rounds are similar, right? What kind of picture qualities do they have? And so they use the standardized picture thingy. I forgot the name of it. But essentially there were two things. One was about whether the picture was negative or positive, right? So for example, watching someone die, that's negative, or positive would be like celebrating a birthday, that's positive, right? Negative or positive. In psychology, we use the word valence to explain this, right? So don't write negative / positive, the valence. That was a word you just have to memorize the keyword in the study, valence of the picture. The second one, what was the second one? The second one, remember, is about intensity, rather, it was about intensity, right? Or in the case of the study, specifically, the keyword that they used was arousal. So for example, let's say you're looking at two positive events, right? One of them could be celebrating a birthday, and the other positive event is getting married, maybe a picture of someone getting married. So which is more arousing? Of course, getting married is a far more emotional thing that happens, so it's far more higher arousal, and then just celebrating a birthday may be lower arousal, right? So the same, they're both positive, right? Positive valence, but the arousal could be different. Or you could be looking at two things which have similar arousal, but one could be positive, one could be negative, right? Depending on the experience that you go through. Okay, so one could be perhaps getting married. That's a positive valence and fairly strong arousal. The other one could be seeing a shark coming at you underwater. That's negative valence and also very strong arousal, right? Seeing a shark coming after you. So these were the two characteristics that they used to match the first round of pictures together with the second round. The foils in the second round had to be matched so they were similar. Okay, that one you just have to remember the keywords. Again, it's a 2-mark question and it's saying name two, so it's basically just stating the two characteristics that were used. You don't have to explain, you don't have to elaborate, just keep it short, sweet and simple. Now, describe the participants used in this study. Now, it says describe the participants. How many descriptions should you give? Look at the marking scheme. Remember I said, generally as a rule of thumb, if it's 3 marks, I need to see 3 different points, right? So I know that if I give 2 points, I'm not going to get 3 marks. I need 3 points, I need 3, okay? So describe the participants in the study. I already gave a hint just now. Firstly, and this just comes down to memory, right? The participants were all what? They were all women, right? So they're all women or females, you could say. So participants were all women. And then what's another characteristics? Now there was something about the hands that was interesting. The participants were all what? Right-handed, right? They were all right-handed, right? Because the amygdala they were studying is on the left side of the brain, so, or rather, excuse me, not on the left side. The amygdala I think spans both sides, but they were studying the amygdala from the left side. So right-handed people were preferred because our brain and our body is cross-wired, right? So the right side of our brain controls the left side of the body. What else? Let's see. Do you remember how many volunteers there were? There were 10 participants in total. Right, so 1, 2, 3, do I get 3 marks? Yes, I do. So 3 full marks, right? You could also say things like, I believe they were healthy as well. You could mention that. They were all volunteers. You could mention that as well. I think that's about it. They don't tell us where the participants came from. They don't tell us the age as well. I can't remember the age. But basically, women, right-handed, 10 participants, memorize all these 3. This is just memory. Literally, this is just memory. You don't have to use common sense. You don't even have to use critical analysis. It's just 3 statements regarding the women. You get 3 marks. Okay. Now this one requires some critical analysis skills. Explain why this study is from the biological approach. Right? Why is it biological? Why not social? Why not cognitive? Why not the other approaches? So remember the biological approach. Just keep in mind that if it's the bio approach, it's something to do with genetics, something with your body, something to do with things you're born with, right? It has to be something along these lines. Your genetic, your body, whatever is in your body, things you're born with, right? And in this study, which part of their body were they looking at? They were looking at the brain, yes, but more specifically, which part of the brain? The amygdala. That's the key thing that you need to have in this answer, the amygdala. You want to understand why this study is from the biological approach. You need to explain why the amygdala is relevant to this study, right? So if you remember, what was the purpose of the amygdala, right? So yeah, this involves linking it to the biological perspective. So let me think of a way that you can phrase this answer. You can say This study by Kenley et al. Was investigating the effect the amygdala has on memory and arousal. I believe memory and arousal, or just memory. Let me think. Memory and emotion, I think, is a better one. Memory and emotion, or let's just say memory and arousal. I think that's fine. Memory and arousal. Sorry, let me make this smaller. And then, how would I link this? Because the amygdala is part of the human body, hence this study is from the biological approach, right? It's a bit wordy, but you get the idea, right? This study by Kenley et al. Was investigating the effect of the amygdala on that has a memory and arousal. Because the amygdala is part of the human body, hence this study is also from the biological approach. Okay, so you have to be able to link, right? You have to have a link to genetics and or something to do with the body, and also to the study and the biological approach. If there's no link, if for example you said something along the lines of Kenley et al. Was investigating the amygdala, this will only get you maybe 1 mark at most. It's too short an answer. You need to explain it clearly to the reader. How is the amygdala relating to biological approach? Why? Because the amygdala is part of your body, right? So that's an easy way to explain it. Okay, something along those lines. You can write it in your own way. Again, there are different ways of writing. There's no one answer that fits all, as long as your answers make sense, right? So always use your common sense. As long as your answers make common sense, it should be acceptable. You can even talk about the brain scans on participants, and how the brain is part of the human body. That's also fine. I think that's perfectly fine, and that's why this study is from the biological approach. Okay, let's move on. In the study by Milgram on obedience, there was a victim, the learner, and a participant, the teacher. Okay, remember Milgram study, the victim got electric shocks from the participant, right? There was a stooge. This participant's giving them shocks from 15 volts to 450 volts. Describe the procedure the victim followed to give feedback to the participant during the learning task. Okay, so I'll tell you the number one mistake that students make. They just describe the general procedure. This is wrong. Okay, so don't just describe the general procedure. Which part of the procedure are they asking you for? Describe the procedure the victim followed to give feedback to the participant during the learning task. What did the victim do to give feedback? How did the victim give feedback? I'm not saying feedback in the terms of, oh, you did a fantastic job teaching this class. No, feedback is anything to do with giving a response to the person, right? Any kind of response. That's feedback in this sense, right? So what was the feedback the victim gave? What did the victim do or say? Remember what the victim did? What did they do? Okay, try and remember what they did. Firstly, if you remember, okay, so let's talk about the answers, right? The victim gave, so if I remember, I recently did this, I think, for my slides. So I remember they gave 3 wrong answers for every 1 correct answer, right? So I just gave approximately 3 wrong answers for every 1 correct answer. Okay, what else can we say? What about the let's see about the, I believe you could say the victim pressed a button which lit up a box on the participant's side, button to indicate their answer, which lit up a box on the participant's side. Remember that part of the procedure. Okay, what else did they do? Let me think. Okay, so let's talk about the pounding on the wall. So the victim pounded the wall at 300 volt shock. The 300 volt shock level. So they never screamed and they never shouted or whatever. They just pounded the wall, and no answers were given after that point. So remember, they didn't give any more answers on the box after they had been shocked. And you can even add, after that, they pounded the wall one more time at 315 volts, and then they did not respond anymore. Right? So these are some of the things that you can mention. Right? Again, it is a, how many marks is here? So look, how many points you have to give? 4-mark question. I should see 4 points. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? This again is memory. Test your memory. What the procedure did when giving feedback. I often find that these kind of things like procedure, the easiest way to remember is to put yourself in the shoes of the experimenter or the participant and imagine yourself going through the experiment. Right? Imagine yourself going through it, and then you can definitely remember the procedure more easily. Right? So I tell my students to sometimes do slides, sometimes do a presentation, do a sketch in class, pretend you're actually doing the study, and then that helps you understand the procedure. Okay? So 4 marks, again 4 points. It's good. Describe the psychology being investigated in the study by Pepperberg that used Alex the parrot as a participant. Okay, so this one is describing the psychology being investigated. So what do we have to talk about here? Some studies this is easy, and some studies this can be quite challenging. First of all, let's look at the marks. So it's a 5-mark question. You should see at least 5 distinct points, right? So some level of depth. Now here, when we talk about psychology, sometimes students get confused. What do they mean? It's such a general term, right? Psychology. What do they mean by it? Well, generally speaking, to me, I usually just tell my students, just think about it this way. What were the main concepts, right, that were being investigated by the researchers in the study? What were the main things? Now, for some studies, it's easy, right? So, for example, let me take a simple study. Let's see, what was the study about? Okay, so Baron Cohen, let's say for example Baron Cohen study, right? It's very easy, it's about the theory of mind, right? So there's a clear psychology or concept that's very clear and very easy to understand there. But there are some studies, like say for example, which study was it? Usually the biological studies, okay, Schechter and Singer is quite clear one. Demon and Kleitman, let's say Demon and Kleitman, right? What psychology is being investigated in Demon and Kleitman? Not really, right? It's a little bit odd because it's about REM and dreams, but it's not really psychology. So in cases like that, I usually tell my students just talk about REM, talk about dreams, talk about stages of sleep in general to be able to answer this question, because those are the main concepts that were being investigated. But we want to talk about Pepperberg. So okay, Pepperberg was the study where Pepperberg had a parrot named Alex and was teaching Alex the concept of same and different. Now, the concept of same and different is not a type of psychology. That's just concept of same and different. It's something that they taught him. It was the methodology of the teaching that touches on psychology. So remember, he used things like modeling, the model rival approach, operant conditioning, right? Reward and punishment, right? You can even talk about observational learning, right? So these are the kinds of things that you want to see in a student's answer, because these are the conditioning. These are the things that you want to see in a student's answer, right? Regarding the psychology being investigated. So for example, let's write a possible answer. And again, it's 5 marks, so you need to give some level of depth. One psychology concept that was in Pepperberg's study involves is observational. Actually, I think in your syllabus it's called social learning. I learned it in my university as observational learning. I think you can call it social learning. In social learning, an organism observes behavior, and replicates a certain behavior, right? Okay. In Alex the parrot watched the trainer and model answer questions about objects, and Alex imitated those behaviors, right? What else can we talk about? Okay, you could add here actually behavior if they are motivated to do so and have the capacity to do it, right? Because he was motivated to get questions right, and he was able to vocalize labels for objects. Okay, that's one thing to add. And let's add a little point about operant conditioning. There is also the concept of operant conditioning, because Alex was given the objects after he answered correctly. These were seen as rewards for good behavior, and hence reinforced Alex to get answers right. Okay, so these are the things you could mention to get marks here. I would write it in this way. You can also mention, or you can explain the model rival approach, talk about modeling, that's fine as well. I go with the basics, operant conditioning, observational or social learning. But you also, because it's a 5-mark question, you have to explain a little bit, right? Explain a little bit about how it was done, how does it relate to Alex, what does he do, and so on and so forth, right? And then you should be able to get 5 marks without too much problem. Okay, let's move on. Okay, from the study by Yamamoto et al., chimpanzee helping, outline one aim in the study. Okay, so remember the chimpanzee helping study? So the 2 chimpanzees, one of them can see another one, one of them has a problem, is trying to reach a juice box, can't reach it. The other chimpanzee needs to be able to give something known as targeted helping, right? So they wanted to see whether chimpanzees could offer that kind of help, right? So the aim of the study by Yamamoto et al. Was to see if chimpanzees could provide targeted helping to a conspecific who was in need, right? So something along those lines. Okay, it's a bit long, let me shorten that. Something along these lines would get you 2 marks, right? The aim of the study by Yamamoto is to see if chimpanzees could provide targeted helping to a conspecific. Conspecific is basically an animal of the same species, right? So another chimpanzee who was in need, right? Who was it? Who had a specific need, right? They needed either a stick or a straw in order to get the juice box, right? So if you have a specific need, are chimpanzees able to provide? Here's the keyword: targeted helping, right? To someone in need. So if you write in this way, you will get 2 marks. If you wrote it this way, for example, which some of my students sometimes accidentally do, they they write it as a question: can chimpanzees show altruism? Right, they write like this. This is not an aim. This is a question, and if it was an aim, right, something like that, chimpanzees show altruism, would not be sufficient at least for 2 marks, right? You need to have some level of depth to your answer. Can chimpanzees show targeted helping, right, to a conspecific who has a specific need, right? So that's how you should be answering. Now, I'm not saying you cannot use the words like altruism and stuff. You can use those words, but you have to give it some level of depth to your answer, right? Can they show altruism to someone else who is in need, and so on and so forth. Okay, outline one methodological weakness. Methodological weakness. Okay, so methodological weakness, anything to do with the procedure or how the experiment is carried out. Now, sometimes I notice in the marking scheme that they sometimes talk about sample, and my students ask me about, is sample part of methodology? Yes, technically yes, sample does come under the methodological characteristics of any study. So if you look at the methodology of a study, sample, procedure, design, but I usually tell my students, talk about the procedure or the design. That's usually what comes to my mind when I think of methodology rather than sample, but I'm saying sample usually is acceptable as well. So if we look at the procedure and the design of the study, what are some of the weaknesses of this study? What's the number one weakness, right? Chimpanzees are wild animals. Where did they conduct the study? They conducted the study in a laboratory, right? So you could say that one weakness is that the study involved chimpanzees in a laboratory. A lab is an artificial environment, and hence chimpanzees may act differently in the lab compared to the wild. This, therefore, this reduces the validity of the study because it's in an artificial environment. Okay, I like to be a little bit wordy when I write, but if your writing is slow, please, keep the main points there and you should get 2 marks. I'm a little bit wordy. I think the last sentence may not be necessary. I think the first 2 sentences would get the 2 marks because you identify the weakness and why it's a weakness, right? So identify, I should put that here. Identify the weakness plus y. And make sure you always link it to the study. So I didn't just say the weakness is that artificial environments are not similar to natural environments. That's a very generic statement. I need to say why the study, which involved chimpanzees in the lab, I need to link it back to the study. Don't just give a general answer, right? Artificial environment, hence chimpanzees may act differently in a lab compared to the wild. So that's explaining the why. Chimpanzees may not act the same way, right? So that's something that you could talk about, right? Or you could even talk about the stick and the straw, right? You can say giving a stick and a straw is not something that a chimpanzee would do in a natural environment, right? So this will not be, it does not reflect what chimpanzees naturally do, giving sticks and straws in, 2 rooms that one you can't see the person in the other half of the room. So yeah, anything along those lines, explaining it as a weakness, why it's a weakness, would give you a full 2 marks, okay? Suggest one real-world application based on procedure. Again, real-world application, what do we remember about this? Remember, you have to talk about who does it help and how does it help them, right? So who does it help? How does it help them? That's the things you want to keep in mind when answering a question like this. So Yamamoto studies about chimpanzees. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to a real-world application, the question does not ask you, please tell me how we can improve the lives of chimpanzees, right? We are looking at this study of altruism, and usually we want to know how can this help humans. Okay, we don't really, it sounds terrible, but we don't really care about how it helps chimpanzees. We want to see how it helps humans. So what do you think? Is altruism a good thing? Yes, it is. How can we help humans do it? Now, if I were to say, I put 2 adult human beings above the age of 21 in 2 boxes and ask them to pass stuff to each other, I don't think that would work as well as a teaching tool for altruism. I think perhaps it would work better with children, right? So for example, it's a 2-mark answer, so you have to give some level of detail. For example, the procedure of this study can be used to teach young children about altruism, right? A teacher may perhaps construct a scenario involving 2 children whereby one of them has a need and the other one can help that person. Okay, something along those lines. And then you maybe get this can help teach children to be helpful to others. Okay, something along those lines. So that basically shows you who does it help? Children. How does it help them? It teaches them to be helpful to others, and definitely get 2 marks. Again, mine is a bit wordy, but I think better to have slightly more words than less. At least you have more content. Definitely you get 2 marks for this, right? Because you've clearly outlined who does it help, how does it help them. Again, sometimes studies can be a bit tricky, particularly animal studies. So Pepperberg study, for example, Pepperberg study also involves an animal. How would you apply Pepperberg's procedure to the real world? How would you do it? Well, if you think about it, Pepperberg's procedure uses the model-rival approach to teach Alex the parrot some new words. Perhaps for children, you could also use the model-rival approach to teach them new words or new things and new concepts, right? The approach is the same, right? The procedure is also the same, but the application is towards children rather than animals. Next question, outline what is meant by the nature-nurture debate using any examples. Do not refer to the study by Schechter and Singer, two factors in emotion. Okay, so this is again a 4-mark question. If it's nature-nurture, I attempt to see 2 marks, 2 marks for nature, 2 marks for nature, 2 marks for nurture. What does those 2 marks mean? Well, if it's like that, usually it's going to be structured like this. So 1 mark is for the definition of nature or nurture, right? 1 mark is for the definition of nature-nurture. The second mark, 1 mark, is for the link to examples. Right? So that's where you get your 2 marks. First define it, then link it to an example. Okay, it's pretty straightforward, right? Pretty straightforward. Nature-nurture debate using any examples. Do not, however, refer to Schechter and Singer study, 2 factors in emotion, right? Do not refer to that. Why? Because it actually comes out in the next question. So don't refer to that. Don't make that mistake. It bolds it here. Do not refer to it. Okay, so let's talk first of all, what is nature, what is nurture? Nature is, okay, and they also put in the question, outline what is meant by it. So what is nature? Nature and nurture. What is nature? Nature is what? Anything to do with biology, things you are born with, and so on and so forth, right? So nature refers to behaviors, thoughts, and emotions which are influenced by our biology, right? Biology, genetics, inborn characteristics. Okay, maybe I'll take that out. Biology and genetics, I think is sufficient. Biology and genetics. Okay, so what example can we give? Remember, we have to give an example, right? What example can we give to support this? For example, can you think about it? Now, don't think of Schechter and Singer, think about something else. What are the other studies that looked at, so we actually had a question, right, about Canley et al. And biology, right? You could use that, but let's test ourselves a bit, how can we, what other examples can we think of, right? What other examples? Okay, oftentimes I like to use, I often use Bandura's example because Bandura can very easily be used to explain both nature and nurture. For example, this one goes slightly beyond your syllabus, but I think it's fine. In Bandura's study, the boys showed more aggression than girls. This may be because of boys having more testosterone, which is a hormone linked to aggression. Okay, so that's how you can explain the nature part. And similarly for nurture, right? You could say nurture, first of all, what's the definition of nurture? So it's not biological, it must be to do with your environment that you are brought up with, right? So nurture is defined as, how would you define it in your own words? Refers to behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that are influenced by, if it's not something we're born with, influenced by our environment and upbringing, right? So that's the nature part. For example, let's look at Bandura's study again. I like using this example. I always teach it to my students. So Bandura's study, the children imitated the aggression of the models they were watching, right, in their environment, just to link it back to the, okay, so that would be one of the ways to explain nature versus nature and nurture, right? So what is meant by nature? Behaviors, thoughts, emotions influenced by biology and genetics. What example do I use? In Bandura's study, boys showed more aggression because of the hormone testosterone. What about nurture? Nurture refers to behaviors, thoughts, and emotions influenced by environment and upbringing. Why, or what example do I give? Bandura's study, children observed the models in the environment and then copied the behavior. Okay, so that's how you would answer this kind of question, nature, nurture. Again, use any examples. You can use literally all the other examples. There are 12 studies, just don't use Schechter and Singer, right? Okay, let's move on. 4 marks there. Explain how one result from the Schechter and Singer study, 2 factors of emotion, supports the nature side, and how one result supports the nurture side. So this one is a bit of a, I find what's confusing about this is that they give you 8 marks, but oftentimes the answer doesn't actually span this number of sentences. Whenever the marking scheme 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 almost, or 1, 2, 3, 4.5 blank lines for you, it makes it seem like the answer has to be really, really long. But personally, not really, in my opinion. So anyway, one of the examples that you can give here is, okay, so it talks about results. So what were the things that we looked at in Schechter and Singer study? They were given an injection, they were deceived about the injection, they said it was called Ciprofloxacin, actually it was adrenaline. Some of them received the placebo, and those who received the injection, then their heart rate increased, their pulse increased, and so on and so forth, right? So when it comes to nature, we're looking for anything that has a biological component, right? What about the study has any kind of biological component? Well, it's to do with the injection, right? The injection of adrenaline, which is a hormone in the body. The injection makes their heart rate beat faster, right? So you would say things like in the participants received an injection of epinephrine, which subsequently increased their heart rate during the experiment. Okay, so again, they put so many lines here, but I feel like honestly this is more than enough. Now, here's one thing that I'm very weak at, but my students usually are good at. Results in terms of numbers. Should you give the numbers? Yes, you should, if you can remember them. I struggle to remember the numbers for every single study, but if you can remember them, please put them in. If you can't remember them, I suppose you don't have to, but if you could, it's always good. Sometimes the results actually say that, you have to state a particular number in the question. So if you can, it's always good. I personally struggle a lot with these results numbers, so I don't usually put them in. I just put the main point, which I think is good enough. But yeah, if you want to, always put the results in terms of numbers. So the next part is the explanation. So yes, you state what the results were, was that some participants received the injection, increased heart rate, right? They measured their heart rate, they found that the heart rate was increased. That's a result that they found. Now the second thing is, how is that supporting the nature side of the debate? How does this support the nature side of the debate, right? You have to link it to your biological explanation, right? So you can say this supports the nature side of the debate because epinephrine stimulates the nervous system in human beings and hence affects the human heart rate. Is there anything else would say this? Let me think. The human body, could say the human body reacts to this hormone by stimulating the fight or flight response. It's a bit wordy, but I think even the first part of the answer should be sufficient, right? You basically just want to do anything you can to link the answer of this increased heart rate back to nature. How is this relevant? Because it has to do with our biology increasing, being affected by hormone and the injection, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at the nurture side of the debate. Okay, so nurture has to do with environment or upbringing. Now technically in this study there's no upbringing, so let's just focus on something to do with the environment. When I say environment, I don't mean reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean what environment the participants were sitting in, or where they were being exposed to something, right? So what can we say? What were the results that we saw? Firstly, we have to decide what is the nurture part. So the nurture part is obviously has to do with the stooge, right? Remember what the stooge does? The stooge affects their feelings, right? You could say right? So it's either the feelings of euphoria or anger, right? So you basically want to explain how the environment with the stooge and so on and so forth managed to affect them, right? But first you have to state what was the results. So you could say, for example, the participants in the euphoria condition with the stooge showed higher levels of euphoria, something along those lines. I think would be good. I can't fully remember the. Let's see. There was misinformed, informed, placebo. I think you could actually add. Let's see. Misinformed group. Let's say the misinformed group had the highest level of euphoria. Okay, so why is that relevant? Is because remember the misinformed group are given false information about the injection, and if they're given false information about the injection, when they feel euphoric or happy for whatever reason, they must be attributing it to the environment rather than to the injection, because they're told, oh, the injection will give you some other symptoms, right, like headache. But then they felt their heart beating. They said, okay, my heart is beating. It's probably not from the injection. It must be because of this guy who is, swinging a hula hoop around his waist on the table or whatever it is, right? So, and then you add that here into the explain how, right? Okay. Participants who were misinformed about the injection must have been looking for another explanation for their physical arousal. Or physiological, I think is the word that they use, physiological arousal. Hence, the environment, in this case the stooge acting, influenced their behavior. The participants. This supports the nurture side of the debate. Okay, so essentially you're saying that participants who were misinformed looked for another explanation for their physiological arousal, therefore the environment which the stooge was acting in influenced the participants, and this supports the nurture side of the debate. Why? Because it has to do with the environment and not with their biology, right? Earlier we looked at the biology of the heart rate increasing because of the hormone, right? Now we're looking at the environment where the person's scores of euphoria are increased simply because of the environment that they're in. Okay. Alright, this is the last question. Yeah, this is a 12-mark question. 10-mark question. So we need to have a lot of points. Okay, it's really long. I'm not going to write the essay for this. I'm just going to put it in point form. So this is the last question to evaluate. Evaluate. What does the word evaluate mean? If you look in your syllabus, evaluate means to weigh opinions, right? So strengths versus weaknesses, to weigh your opinions, to give some critical analysis and so on and so forth, right? So you have to evaluate, just like how you evaluate anything, right? Before you go shopping, before you buy something, you evaluate, is this a good product? Before you support a particular team, you evaluate, is this a good football team, bad football team, whatever, right? So we're looking at Laney's study about false memory. Remember, Laney's study involves asparagus, right? There were some groups, they had to, eat asparagus, not eat asparagus, they had to rate whether they liked asparagus and so on and so forth, right? 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses, okay, keep that in mind, always put two of each, and one of the evaluation points must be about independent measures. So because it says must independent measures, usually I tell students to write this first, right, and then worry about the other 3 later on. Write this first so you don't forget it. It's up to you, right, it's really up to you. So I'm just going to put this in point form, but I'm going to give you guys the format that I use, right? So a general writing tip format that I use is called the PEEL method, right? This is adapted from a method I learned. So the P stands for point. In fact, you can find this on one of my videos. P stands for point. What's the point you're making? E stands for elaborate. The other E stands for explain. And sorry, example. Elaborate or explain. Example. And the L, oops. The L stands for link. Okay, so PEEL, point, elaborate, explain, example, link. Okay, so how does this work? Firstly, we have to, okay, so we do it in format, right? So what is the first strength that we want to talk about? We can use the word independent measures, right? We want to talk about that. So the independent measures, rephrase that. One of the strengths of Laney's study is the independent measures used in the design. Okay, design. Okay, so now you have to think back of your research methods knowledge to remember what were some of the strengths of the independent measures design. Now, if you forget, then well, you just have to pray your memory works and use common sense if you can to remember. But essentially, if you remember, one of the main things about the strengths about independent measures is that there are lower demand characteristics. Why? Because in independent measures, if there are two groups of people, in this case it was the love asparagus and the control group, they each are separated, right? Love asparagus does not know what's happening here, right? They don't know. And the control group does not know what's happening here. They also don't know, right? So because they don't know each other and what's going on, there's lower demand characteristics, right? The strength of this method is that it reduces demand characteristics in the study because participants only go through one level of the IV. Okay, so now I've given the point. Actually, no, let me put this as a separate sentence. Make this a bit smaller so I can fit it into one sentence. Okay, you should still be able to see that. So that's one. Okay, then the second one. Okay, so that's the P. Now I wanted to explain the P, right? So explaining the P is that this method helps to reduce demand characteristics because each participant only goes through one level of the IV. Okay, so that's how I would put the explanation or elaboration of why that is a strength. And then third, we need to give the example, right? So I've done explaining. What's the example I use? In Laney's study, there were two levels of the IV, either love asparagus or the control group. Participants were randomly allocated and were not aware of the other group. Okay, so they don't know what's happening in the other group, and therefore they can't figure out the study, and that helps to reduce demand characteristics of the study. That's always a strength, right? The example here and the link go hand in hand, right? Because you must make sure the example and the link go hand in hand together. The reason why I put link is that sometimes my students give me examples which are very vague. They say things, for example, there were two levels in the study and each participant went through each level. That's not linked, right? So for example, a badly linked example would look like this. There were two conditions and participants went through either one. That's how some of my students sometimes answer, and it's wrong. Why? Because there is no link here. Where's the link? I don't know which study they're talking about. Which study do I need to talk about? Laney. So always talk about Laney study. Okay. So that's one. So this is one of the strengths. Let's talk about another strength. Okay, so what's another strength of the study? Now when it comes to strengths and weaknesses, if you watch my videos, I usually talk about strengths and weaknesses and, sorry, let me just summarize. What are the common strengths and weaknesses people talk about? So reliability, it's a very common one. Validity, can talk about ethics, talk about the sample, you can talk about the design of the study, you can talk about, what else do I talk about? There's one more thing. Okay, that's about it. Yeah. Keep it simple. So you can talk about a lot of things in this, anything to do with the study, right? Anything. Talk about the data, right? The analysis, a lot of things that you can talk about in the whole study, but these are the general main areas that people usually talk about. So let's take another strength, okay? So another strength, what would that be? So here we talked about independent measures that has to do with design. Let's talk about another strength. What can we talk about? Let's see, Laney study. Why don't we talk about the strengths of data? Let's talk about the strengths of data. So another strength of Laney's study is that they use quantitative data. Okay, so that's the point that I'm trying to make, right? What can I say about this strength? Okay, quantitative data is advantageous, right? Because it allows researchers to easily calculate and compare results across different participants in the study. Results can also be more easily and efficiently analyzed. Okay, so basically when dealing with numbers, it's a lot easier to compare, calculate, stuff like that. That's a general explanation for this. Now we want to give an example that is specific to Laney's study, right? So in Laney's study, the participants had to, let's think of the example. So there were quite a few had to, okay, let's see. It's been a while since I've looked at Laney's study. I can't really remember. Okay, so there was the food history inventory, the FHI. There was the restaurant questionnaire. There was also, the one that I like is the grocery shopping list. What was that one called? It was called the food cost questionnaire. So for example, participants had to select how much money they were willing to pay for a pound of asparagus in the food cost questionnaire. This would have produced quantitative results, all right, which was money, amount of money, and hence was easy to calculate and compare between the love asparagus and control condition. Okay, so that again ties it up very nicely with the study itself. Very clearly, I'm talking about Laney studies. There's no other study here that I could be confusing it with. If you ever want to know whether your example and link are good, just ask yourself, could I have written this for any other study? In my second point here, right, so the second point, the explanation, this could apply in general to almost any study. But my example cements that answer and says that no, I'm only talking about one study, and that's Laney's study. So that's the two strengths we talked about. Now we talk about weaknesses. Okay, so let's talk about one weakness in Laney's study is what can we say? Reliability, validity, ethics, sample. Okay, so two simple ones we can talk about is actually sample and ethics. So is the limitations of the sample. Okay, so what were some of the limitations of the sample, right? If you remember from the study, let's explain this. Samples which are not randomly selected from a population are hence not representative of the population and cannot be used to generalize. Okay, so that's something to define what some of the weaknesses are when it comes to sampling, right? In Laney's study, Laney used opportunity sampling of students, right? Opportunity sampling is biased, and students are a very narrow students are very, how would I phrase this? Students are very very narrow characteristic for the general population. Therefore, the limitations of Laney's sample reduce the generalizability of the results to a wider population. Okay, so that's something that you could say on the lines, because Laney only used students and opportunity sampling, which was very biased, right? You need to do random sampling, and you need to obviously have a large enough sample that represents the wider population. Just having students and using opportunity sampling, not good enough, right? So that's very clear. What's another weakness we can do? Like I said, ethics is a very easy way to get weaknesses, right? Another weakness of Laney's study is in terms of deception. Okay, so there was deception that was used, right? We can say that deception is unethical because people have the why. Why is deception unethical? Why is it wrong to lie to people? You can't just say because lying is wrong, because people have the what? The right to know what is happening in a study before agreeing to it, right? So people should always have the right to know what they are agreeing to. You can't lie to people; it's wrong. But Laney had a deception. What was that deception? What was the deception? Laney deceived participants about the aims of the study. Laney claimed it was about, what was it? Food and memory? No, food and personality. Food and personality, when actually it was about false memories, right? Participants therefore did not give fully informed consent, hence making this study unethical. Okay, so that's one of the things you can do to explain the weakness of that, right? Why is it a weakness? Is because participants did not give informed consent, and therefore they did not have a right to know. They did not know what was happening fully in the study before agreeing to it. So let's reflect on that again. Strengths, always talk about the strength that is mentioned. Use this method, PEEL, point, elaborate, explain, example. Example has to be linked. Reliability, validity, ethics, sample, design, data, these are the things you can talk about. In terms of reliability, I would usually put it as a strength because all the measures and procedures were standardized, and so that's a very good strength when it comes to reliability. Let's talk about one here is independent measures. First of all, you can explain why is that a strength. It's a strength because you lower demand characteristics of each participant. In Laney's study, there are only two levels, love or control. Participants rarely educated and not aware of the other group, and therefore you could even add things like therefore they could not have guessed, or therefore their demand characteristics were lowered. You can even add that if you want. Another strength of studies, they use quantitative data, so numbers. What's the advantage? It's because you can easily calculate, compare results, so on and so forth, efficiently analyze. In Laney's study, what was the example? You have to give an example that involves quantitative data. The food cost questionnaire, right? How much they were willing to pay for food, produces quantitative results such as amount of money, and hence easy to calculate and compare between the love and control condition, right? One weakness in Laney's study is the limitation of the sample. What's the limitation? Samples which are not randomly selected are hence not representative and cannot be used to generalize. In this case, we use opportunity sampling, is biased, and students are very narrow characteristics of the population, right? Therefore, limitation of the sample prevents generalizability to a wider population. That's the weakness of the sample. Lastly, the weakness is also the deception. It's unethical. Why is it unethical? People have the right to know what's happening before I agree to it, right? And Laney deceived participants about the aims, claimed it was about food and personality when actually it's about false memories. Participants therefore did not give fully informed consent. That was wrong. They need to give informed consent. Although there was informed consent, it wasn't fully informed. It was deceived, right? Hence making this study unethical. Ta-da! And you get full marks. Now there's a lot of pages there. Please use it up. Okay. So in general, let's cover some general tips. Okay. So you can see that there are 60 marks for this paper, and this paper is about 1.5 hours. So if I were to take 60 divided by, so if you take 90 minutes divided by 60, you get 1.5, right? So for every mark, you should only spend a maximum of 1.5 minutes, right? 1.5 minutes on each question. On each mark, right? Obviously, you can save time here, right? A 1 mark question, this one takes 2 to 3 seconds, so you save time there, and you spend most of your time, obviously, on the 10 mark question, right? So that's one way to do it. Don't spend so much time on the short answer questions that you forget to do this. Or some students like to do this first. I don't know, that's up to you. What I would suggest is you maybe at the start of your exam, you can write out a structure, a brief structure on paper, right? So there's some blank pages here. Write a brief structure for your essay here, and then later come back and complete it, right? So do it while your mind is fresh. You can do that. If not, just spend minimal amount of time here and then come back to the questions later if you're not sure. Again, highlight this. Memory, you can't escape from it. If you want to know how to memorize better, go to YouTube and look for this guy named Ali Abdaal. He's amazing. He's got some evidence-based study tips that are really good. Please go and check that out to improve your memory. Common sense is something you just develop through experience and age. So, I can't teach you common sense. You just have to figure it out on your own. Critical analysis, however, you can get through practice. Critical analysis is just practice, and asking yourself, how do you analyze things? I always tell my students, actually all of us critically analyze stuff all the time, right? When it comes to your football team, right? Football, right? The boys in my class can talk endlessly for hours about football, right? They analyze this, analyze that, which is the best player, how many times he does this, how many free kicks he can save and stuff like that. And so I'm like, you guys are already analyzing. Now I just want you to take the same skill and concept into psychology to do with evaluation, right? Girls can analyze which K-pop drama is better, or which K-pop band is better. Is it 21? Is it Big Bang? Whatever it is. And so I sometimes use those examples in class to show that no, you can critically analyze. All of us can. All of us do it all the time. It's just that you need to now apply that skill when it comes to analyzing, evaluating a study, right? Ask yourself, how could Laney have been better? What were the weaknesses, the mistakes that Laney probably made? Or what were the great things about Laney that made it such a good study, right? So always think about it in these terms and you should do fine, okay? That's generally how I would answer an exam like this. I hope this helps you. I will, when I have time, I'll upload for other papers as well. This is just for paper 1, right? Paper 1, which in my opinion is fairly straightforward. And then paper 2 is a little bit more writing. We'll cover that in the next video. So thanks so much for watching. Please, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs up, give me a comment, give me a subscribe. And if you always want, you can always donate. I'm filming this video in the middle of my unemployment. I don't have a job. I'm also struggling through COVID-19. So if you want to support me and my channel, please do so. I welcome all forms of donations, right? Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.